Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are on this fast forward planet, which is, enveloped in so many layers of turbulent change that it's really easy to lose track. We used to focus mainly on, well, first the pandemic and then always climate change and stuff like that. But the information environment itself is so polluted and turbulent now that it's necessary to spend a big chunk of my time focusing on that too. Here today, we're going to get to the core of a really important issue in science, which is how we do it, especially on certain issues. Although you'll see in this discussion that spans from earthquake prediction to here social sciences, behavioral sciences. There's more of a hardening. I see factionalization at an epic scale. I'll describe a couple examples. And what gets lost is sort of what do we really know and not know. Everyone's trying to win and lose. And that's why I was really excited to stumble back onto Corey Clark's work as a visiting scholar at Penn with Phil Tetlock, creating an adversarial collaboration project on trying to foster more productive discourse amid divisions on either methodology or philosophy or even background ideology. This is really important stuff. It seems kind of mushy, but it's important because the issues that are framed by the science are important. Like, should kids get off of cell phones or not? So here we go. And joining us today is Corey Clark, as I said, who's the co-director of this adversarial collaboration project, I think, which is kind of coming to an end. This was like a specific beginning, middle, and an end thing.
I don't know.
Oh, we'll talk about that in a second.
Maybe
And Gordon Pennycook, who's at Cornell, behavioral scientist, who was involved in this in one of the case studies. So first of all, thanks for breaking away some time to talk about it. Corey, you were on here not long ago with a colleague talking about self-censorship in science, another issue, what we choose not to publish or how we relate to other people's science. So I'd love to start with just sort of how this came to be. Ask you each, why you focus time and intellectual energy on this question, and obviously start with Corey because you and Tetlock kind of got this going. So what drove you to this work?
Mostly Phil. I think Phil Tetlock drove me to this work, but he'd been interested in adversarial collaboration for a long time. He was buddies with Daniel Kahneman, who was the first person to publish a thing called an adversarial collaboration, and he continued to advocate for them for his entire life or the rest of his life, and participated in several as well. Phil hadn't really participated in them, but I think he'd wanted to because both Phil and I were pretty disappointed, I think, with how scientists disagree with one another. They're often quite hostile. The exchanges that happen and someone writes an initial article and then somebody writes a response to that, and then the original authors write a response to that. You almost never see any progress. You almost never see people actually getting closer together. And often that process, rather than shrinking the belief gap, just adds interpersonal conflict. It just makes these people not like each other and then avoid each other. And so, yeah, we're trying to make it normal for scholars to work with people they disagree with and become friends. And Gord was one of the first people we approached to do an adversarial collaboration, and now he's done 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or something, and they're going really well for him. So I think we're seeing that this is possible for a lot of people. Maybe it's not possible for everyone, but if it's possible for a lot of us, then there's hope that there could be a norm in science where when we disagree civilly, and we actually try to find common ground rather than try to win, as you were saying.
Yeah, boy, we're going to talk about why that's so hard. And the media plays a role in that too. So Gordon, why this question? Why you just describe a little bit what you do historically, just your work, and then what led you into this particular project?
Well, I actually come from Kahneman influenced a lot of my work in the early days. And like, so I do work in judgment and decision making and understanding the nature of human reasoning and trying to understand how the mind works. And some of that work is on, the nature of people's beliefs, but also, why do they fall for fake news and things like that. And I got into the adversarial collaboration thing because I like being right, but I'm okay with being wrong. You know what I mean? Like, and I always liked it, even when I was working with other my own like collaborators. Cases in which we had different predictions about something were the funnest. Those are the funnest studies to run, because like now we have something that it's like an exciting result. If you run a study, you know what's going to happen. It's not really, you don't really even need to run the study. I mean, and so that's where it's the most interesting to do science. And so in many ways, it's just, it's more fun. It's way more fun to do it where, part of it is for all the reasons that Corey said. If I have someone who I think I disagree with, who's publishing papers, what I'm trying to do is produce something that I think would convince them that they're wrong and that I'm right. Or, that is if the experiment ends up the way that I expect it to. But knowing what they think beforehand is going to like make that way easier and way better. And I mean, in reality, unless you do it that way, unless you actually discuss it with the person, they're probably not going to change their mind, and they might just ignore what you're doing anyways. And so it's just, I found it to be both a lot of fun, but also really effective. Now, it's not always a lot of fun, but we can talk about that too, but it can be fun.
I guess it depends on how you define fun. So Corey, back to you on the sense of, okay, so Ted Locke had this idea, he batted around with you, and then there's actually a science to resolving disputes. A colleague of mine when I was at Columbia, Peter Coleman, a psychologist, ran the Difficult Conversations Laboratory there. And there's all these methodologies they've worked out for how to lay out the landscape of a discussion. And another friend of mine, long gone, Ted Keel, who was a labor mediator back in New York City, negotiating these deals between the union and the city and over transit and stuff. He talked to me about the anatomy of disputes. If you search, I think if you Google search for Kheel, Ted Keel, and anatomy of a dispute, he wrote books about this, but more from the legal mediator world. How did you settle on creating the template for the project? In other words, okay, you put out a call for people like Gordon to come and work with you, but you had sort of a mediating role. But how do you develop that actual menu of how to do it?
I think we kind of have a sort of template, but I try not to be too rigid about it, because all the projects are a little bit different, and kind of depends on how many people you have, kind of depends on the temperaments of the people you have participating. But we do have like certain things we recommend. One thing that Gord kind of hinted at was getting these pre-registered predictions down in writing before data collection, because what often happens with traditional disagreement is like I say something and then Gord runs a study and says, no, you're wrong. And I go after the fact, well, your methods were crap. Like I would have never predicted the thing that you said I was going to predict. With adversarial collaboration, when you get everybody to agree on the method beforehand and agree beforehand, I predict X and you predict not X, then people are kind of more required to admit that their predictions were not realized if they weren't realized. So getting these pre-registered predictions is really helpful. Having a moderator is really helpful. I don't think it's always necessary. I have some adversarial collaborations that go really well without moderators. I think those are often where people are getting along really well, and maybe people aren't too emotionally attached to their hypotheses. Sometimes people are really attached. Sometimes they're only loosely attached. If they're strongly attached, then it's really helpful to have a moderator to help resolve disagreements as they pop up and make sure things move forward when things get really heated, which does happen from time to time. And then like various other things, like like a lot of the process is vetoing each other's methods because both teams have their preferred their preferred approach to answering the question, because that's what's worked for them in the past. And so you really require everybody to be more flexible and to forward lots of new ideas until everybody's satisfied. So what ends up happening is tons of pre-testing of materials and methods to make sure things are fair from the beginning. So I think in my case, I really learned through trial and error. When I talk about some of these things, people say it's similar to like mediation or like couples counseling.
Right.
But I guess dealing with conflict, it's kind of similar in any domain.
Gordon, can you dig in on this specific example on the efficacy of accuracy prompts? Maybe you could translate that for the non-technical version of what that means. I think I know what it means, but you had to describe it to your neighbor.
Yeah. That that's actually a pretty simple study. That was just one thing that we discovered in past work was that people will sometimes share misinformation online without even thinking about whether it's true or false. Like what they think about is it important? Does it make me look good? Will I get likes? Stuff like that. But they don't think, wait, is it true? And so we developed this kind of intervention where we just remind people about accuracy.
Breaking news, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So, but it, it's a funny disconnect. But it lends itself to potential interventions because you can kind of remind people to think more about accuracy. You don't tell them like what's true or not, or you don't even, in most cases, even tell them to think about accuracy. You just use subtle reminders or prompts. But then this other group of researchers said, wait, this only works among Democrats. It doesn't work among Republicans. And so they published a paper that was a kind of sort of meta-analysis of 5 existing studies. But this, owing to what Corey said before, we had our own meta-analysis that had more 20 studies in it, and that said it did work for Republicans. And what we were about to do was do the thing that everyone does, is just write papers that talk past each other and never kind of resolve the dispute. And so Corey contacted us, or we contacted her. I can't actually remember which.
I think there was like a Twitter.
There was some. We were arguing with Twitter, and so there was animosity, and there's a longer backstory behind our research group and the other research group involved in this, and there was history there, I guess. So there's animosity involved, and so we were like, well, and this is a case where we actually do need a mediator, and something that would be some way to resolve the dispute for other people to read in some sort of way that's not just a bunch of academics talking past each other. And this is what we got. We ended up doing what's called like a multiverse analysis. We have a big data set, and there's so many different ways to analyze it. We decided we'll just do all the ways and report all of it. And then the two groups had different interpretations of what they thought was important. We roll all that down, and then we report the results, and we both report our interpretation of them. In this case, the result is a little bit unsatisfying because we ended up just continuing to disagree, except for on the key one. The part that we thought about was the most important was that the effect does in fact work among Republicans. The question is it work less among Republicans or not? And there, the results are basically ambiguous in our view, and in their view, a little bit less ambiguous. But so it resolved an aspect of the dispute. We have now a kind of more authoritative paper on the topic. It was not easy to do this one. It required a lot of mediation, and there was a lot of animosity involved, but we did get it done. So
that's so interesting. Yeah, one of my questions was how much of this is in the design phase of the research, as opposed to like the outcome of the research. And what we normally see on Twitter or Blue Sky is, we meaning people like me, is these big battles over outcomes.
Yeah. Well, in this case, this is a unique one because all the experiments were run, and the data was basically just put away somewhere else.
A meta-analysis.
All we needed to do was we just had to decide what was the right analysis for this.
There were arguments about what analyses to run and how many to run and which kinds of things to look at.
Yeah.
So
and
I think a lot of the time the methodological fights come from the outcome fights. Like people disagree on the outcome, and so they turn to the methods in order to disregard the outcome, which is why the adversarial collaboration is nice, because we agreed on the method.
Yeah. So there was so we had, in this case, it was complicated because it was such a large data set with lots of different possible ways to look at it, that we had a lot of things to resolve.
How much of that, I don't want to make this sound critical of the social sciences, but how much of this reveals this sort of plasticity in social science research? I've done shows here before. Like I had on Seth Bornstein, who's an AP science writer, like a real hard-bitten, long, veteran science reporter, mostly on climate and stuff, but on many other things. And I had him on with the social scientist Dana Fisher and another social scientist who I'm forgetting now. And one of them mentioned qualitative data, and he said, "What's that?" And a lot of my friends and contacts in the physical science realm even sort of scoff at social science because it's got this sort of mushy factor. And believe me, I'm not defending their positions, but it's something that comes up. And how much of what you're discussing here kind of gets at this sort of, as you said, there you can have hostile approaches to the same data sets and come out with the end result is creditable right here. But
yeah, I mean, I think it's actually, it's not just that it's mushy, it's that it's complicated to measure things psychologically. So like think about just measuring ideology.
Yeah, right.
You could come up with 10 different, maybe more different ways
like 1,000.
to do that. And so that's actually one of the things that was led to all these different analysis, because you could look at partisanship, Democrat versus Republican versus independent, or you could look at like political conservatism. Are you liberal, are you left, or you right? You can ask that question a few different ways, and we have all that data in this study. So we have we have all this information about people that we can use to do the quantitative analyses. But how do you decide what is it more important that it's about ideology or partisanship? And that's theoretical questions that are important. But it's only mushy because they're complex questions. It's not because of any
well,
other.
it shows you how important the importance of definitions.
Yes, and like a theory in this case, in terms of in this particular instance, the question is it doesn't work among Republicans. The underlying idea was that there's a segment politically of the population in the United States who isn't responsive to reminders about accuracy. Mm-hmm. And then theoretically, why would that be the case? And then, they have different ideas about why that would be the case. And they might be different if you're talking about their partisanship. It's all about identity versus their ideology, which is maybe more about the way they think about things. And so unless you have the theory right, then you can't really get the analysis right. In this case, I think that was partly part of the issue, is that we were unsure on our end what their actual theory was. And so we didn't know how to test it. And so that's why we needed to talk to them about it in order to get the actual analyses that would be agreed upon in advance.
So talking across those barriers between papers, the brittleness of paper to paper debates. This has come up in the physical sciences too. I'll get to that in a few minutes. But I want to talk about some general trends in science where you mentioned Twitter, and I still live there more than on Blue Sky and other places. If you use it in an active way and don't just kind of get buffeted by the feed, I think it's a very valuable tool. But we're still dominated by win-lose kind of construct. And not only that, then you get some really weird things going on, like the Atlantic, with Jonathan Haidt's work on cell phones. You can have the same publication writing pieces, the panic over smartphones doesn't help teens, and the phone-based childhood now. So there's this hyper amplification, and a lot of what science is doing in the real world is trying to raise funds and sustain projects and get more grants. And so if you have high visibility, that's a really important factor. I don't want to say you're fighting a losing cause, but how hard is it to think about applying this kind of process more widely than you already are? Corey, maybe for you first.
You mean getting people who are participating in really consequential debates to do something like an adversarial collaboration? I mean, it gets harder when you're dealing with really high profile people. It gets harder when you're dealing with really high profile debates. It gets harder when you're dealing with, if there's a lot of money on the line or if there's policy on the line. I think adversarial collaboration could be helpful in the debate over smartphones. One issue that we've had in our projects, and Gord's experience too, is that our results are often like kind of wishy-washy. So the Atlantic wouldn't care about
Bingo. That's kind of my point.
adversarial collaboration on smartphones, because it
Yeah.
would probably be like, well, in this subgroup, there's a small effect here, and we're not sure if it lasts a long time or not. They don't make great headlines. And this is just a concern I have about the approach in general, where I think a lot of scholars know adversarial collaborations would be great for science, but they're not great for attention.
Right.
And attention is so important in terms of, even for Atlantic, of course, cares about clicks, but even like scientific journals, they care about their impact factors, which means they need people to read and cite their papers.
Sure.
And of course, really flashy findings get more attention. So even though I think in principle, adversarial collaboration is useful for any empirical debate, I think like the attention market is not aligned with adversarial collaboration. And I actually have no good ideas for how we overcome that issue.
Gordon, have you thought about that aspect of this?
Yeah, although I guess I didn't not that in particular case. Like what I was thinking was that the good news is that I think most scientists care more about the science than the attention. There are cases in which there are, and here's my defense of this statement. I think the concern that people have when coming into adversarial collaboration, it's not like they are afraid that they're going to lose grant money, or like not going to publish something that people don't care about. I think mostly people don't even think about that. They don't, because most scientists are just kind of obsessed with the thing that they care about and their pet theories. They often aren't even thinking about whether anybody else cares about them or even thinks about them. Maybe that's my particular subfield, but I would think people care too little about what other people think about their own work. And so the real barometer is like trying to break away from doing things in the old way that's comfortable and that's fun and that like allows them to play in their sandbox and do the kind of things that they are used to doing, and then breaking out to try to do something that's bigger and more important, that like breaks theoretical barriers and that like brings people together. Now that might not make great headlines, but it's still good science, and eventually good science gets to the headlines. Maybe, I don't know, maybe I'm optimistic.
Well, unless it's nuanced.
It's nuanced, but I think that's just what it is. I mean, it is the case that like nuance does not sell, but it still becomes the thing that we know about the world, and that's what eventually is going to permeate through the way that things are discussed, even if it isn't, fast or high profile.
No, that's really good. That's a good way of thinking about it, and it makes me feel less pessimistic.
Well, there you go.
Because if young scientists really care what's actually real more than what's going to get you influential on social media or the like, then there's hope for the world. I thought, Corey, maybe you could walk through some of these projects that had been done so far.
Yeah. Now I'm like, when's the last time I updated this website?
These are old.
So that first one is political ideology related to belief updating. That paper was just recently accepted. But so this one was looking at whether liberals, and this related to the project with Gord, this looking at whether liberals or conservatives are more resistant to updating their beliefs in response to new evidence. There's a big team of scholars who've been publishing on the rigidity of the right side of that debate, meaning conservatives, people on the right, Trump supporters, Republicans, whatever you want to call them, are less likely to update their beliefs in response to evidence, in response to scientific evidence, than people on the left. And then there are folks that think, no, they're probably roughly symmetrical. And that project was looking at that. Are liberals and conservatives like similarly resistant to things they don't want to believe? Or are conservatives less likely to update? And again, we found this like sort of nuanced thing, which was like conservatives were a teensy bit more rigid, like half the time, not even approaching what would be a small effect size. And so I think some people will be able to look at that paper, which I think is available online, the preprint. I think that link might work.
That's cool. All right.
I think people who are in the rigidity of the right side will look at it and be like, look, conservatives are more rigid. And people on the symmetry side will be like, look, there's basically no difference, which is one of like, on the one hand, it sort of explains why we even have this disagreement in the first place, because the real world evidence is pretty ambiguous. It's pretty unimpressive. but yeah, in terms of like actually persuading people and getting scholars to merge their underlying beliefs, it's tricky.
Before we get back into the list, I have to ask a question here. This is sort of a wide view question. Is this an arena where it's important to think about how the question is even structured, like conservative, liberal?
Mm-hmm.
When you think about issues where people have hard views, like vaccination, radiation, et cetera, quite often those curves meet at the far end. There are people who are quote unquote liberal or conservative. Is there a different definitional way to look at people who have that hardened belief that's almost impossible to break, that isn't a function of the traditional red blue?
Well, yeah, you can. That's one challenge of doing this kind of thing. We looked at ideology a few different ways, and we also, you can see there in the title, we looked at rigidity of the extremes, which is the perspective that it's not that left or right are more rigid, it's that extremists on the left or right are more rigid. And we did find some evidence for that too, that people who are on the far left or far right are more rigid, but then that affects even a tiny bit larger for people who are really far right. Some of the time, they're really small.
Right. There you go.
Depends on how you're looking at it. Yeah.
But yeah, you can imagine, like, so we did a bunch of pre-testing for different methods. We did a bunch of pre-testing for different issues to try to establish equal priors and things like that. But you can imagine if we picked one particular issue, take like COVID vaccines, we might get one result. And then if we picked a different climate change, we might get a completely different result.
Right.
And that's what adversarial collaboration, one thing it's supposed to do is to help people overcome those, like, maybe like cherry picked issues that I anticipate this group's going to be really rigid on this. So it's the perfect topic to explore for this question. When you have adversaries, you veto a lot of those, what you might consider to be like biased methods and materials, and hopefully come up with a test that's a little bit more balanced from the beginning.
Would you say that you're successful? Sorry, I'm asking questions now.
No, that's you should.
Were you successful in getting the people who are prominently in support of this rigidity of the right hypothesis to be a part of this collaboration?
So this was one, I think probably the most, I think Danny Osborne would maybe be the one who was the most. This was one where we started with a lot more people on the rigidity of the right side, and a couple people left the project over time. You never know, like with these kinds of things, when people leave the project, because everybody's, when people won't do them. Most scholars are very busy, and most scholars have way too many research projects. Like, we're all doing dozens of projects that we don't have time for. And so when you approach someone to do one of these and they say, no, I don't have time, they're telling the truth. And when someone backs off of a project and they say, I just don't have time for this anymore, they're telling the truth. But with adversarial collaborations, it's particularly hard because you need people to represent different sides, and you want those people to stay on the project throughout the process, or things get lopsided eventually, which might have happened a little bit with that one.
Boy, there's so much rich stuff here. Now you're reminding me of a conversation I had in like 2020 with a bunch of young postdocs who wrote a paper, Nature Sustainability, about what academia needs to do to foster sustainability research that matters in the world. In other words, sort of community-based, blah, blah, blah. And everything that they listed was the antithesis of what academia is about. And one thing they said, for example, is a paper that's interdisciplinary and community-based takes time just to understand each other's methodologies, as you were saying earlier. It takes time to build the work. It takes time to do the community, trust building, et cetera, et cetera. And I guess this gets back to what I was asking earlier about whether this can become more normalized. It sounds like even setting aside just the academic competitiveness question, it sounds like it's logistically really hard to justify.
Yeah, they definitely take more time, which is something academics hate. We want to get things done as quickly as possible. Yeah, and it's just frustrating. Like, when you're working with a team where everyone wants to find the same things, you can decide on the methods in like an hour. Whereas with an adversarial collaboration, you might be debating for months and you might run 4 pre-tests, which is a pain. And it also costs a lot of money. So yeah, although I'm like one of maybe the bigger proponents of adversarial collaboration, I'm also not, I'm not super confident that they will ever become mainstream because they're so misaligned with the things that academics care about, both on the time and financial side, but then also on the attention side. And maybe Gord's right. Like eventually it does become people, I think we do move closer to the truth. But I'm not sure that those are the papers that tend to get published in like Nature and Science and PNAS.
No.
The nuanced claims that are like, there's a little truth on both sides.
Hey, can I give a counterexample?
Sure.
Totally.
Yeah.
So we because I've done the example that we gave was one of the adversarial collaborations, but that wasn't even the first one. We did another one that was including John Haidt that was not about phones and stuff. It was about other things. Mm-hmm. And then that one's an example of one that's taking forever because we still haven't finished it, and it's all just professors and no one is doing any actual work. We like talking to each other though, that's fine. But the counterexample is Don Moore is this professor at Berkeley, and he doesn't think that overconfidence is an individual difference. And me and my grad student do, and then we had submitted some work and we were talking about it at the Society for Judgment Decision Making conference. Don Moore came up, we had a discussion, and we're like, hey, we're doing these adversarial collaboration things. Do you want to do that? Corey was able to fund some of it, and there it is. But that we had no mediator in this case. Corey was not involved. It was just Don and his students and me and my students. Everybody was reasonable. We ran that study and we got the paper in. It's accepted at Science. Nice. Psych Science now. Pending.
What were your findings? That it is a trait?
It's a trait, yeah. So that is, the results were unambiguously in my favor. and Don agreed with that. He had some.
They always are, aren't they?
I haven't been wrong yet, but that's okay. And so, but I mean, there's some stuff they put in that they're like, wow, but this and that and the other thing. But there still is. It was a very collegial adversarial collaboration. Wasn't adversarial at all, and from like conception to publication was, I think, maybe 8 months.
Wow.
You think had your results been more ambiguous, it would have gotten into Science?
Psych Science.
Psych Science.
No, probably not. I mean, yeah. I mean, it was just in this case we had a clear answer and we had clear results, and it was like a clear dispute, and everything was straightforward, and so then it makes sense for the journal. But that's just what all research is. There's no like thing where if you do the recipe in this sort of way, then you're guaranteed a science paper. It just It depends on what you're doing, how important the thing is, and whatever. In this case, I think we got into Psych Science in large part. If this was not an adversarial collaboration, it would not have gotten into Psych Science.
Yeah.
And that's a top journal in psychology. It's because Don Moore has made that argument for a long time, and that we were disputing it, and that we kind of came to an agreement that maybe it is actually a trait. That's what made it significant, and something that's worth publishing. If it was just me writing that paper and I did the same analysis, there's no way that it would have got published in Psych Science.
Yeah, I think all else equal, adversarial collaborations help with the publication process. But if because of the adversarial collaboration you end up with kind of meh results, I'm not sure if the adversarial collaboration can make up for those results, right?
If the alternative is you're doing something where you're just trying to confirm what you think and not talk to other people, then yeah, maybe. But that's lame. That's so lame. That's like the worst.
How much of this, I assume nearly all of this intersectional collaborative effort is through Zoom and the like?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I mean, every case that I've ever done it was through Zoom. I met Don. I've met him before and I know him in person, and we talked in person before, and that's what started the collaboration, but it was all just Zoom discussion. Yeah. I
think I can't remember if I mentioned to you, Gordon, but a long time ago, I stumbled onto this John Wesley Powell Center for Analysis and Synthesis, which is an awful name for what is basically a crisis counseling initiative run by the U.S. Geological Survey for it's at least a decade. I think it's longer than that now. And it's in the Rockies, and teams submit proposals to when they have some methodological or other dispute. This is in the physical sciences. And the one that caught my attention was a paper in the journal EOS. It's not really a journal, like the magazine of the American Geophysical Union, and it was describing this really big dispute about earthquake. It came after New Zealand and Japan had really bad earthquakes in 2011-ish that this community didn't understand. And what they do there, they get them together physically. I mean, it takes money and time. And they go, I love this. They also have to take an oath. There's a process, and I have a YouTube video of this discussion where everyone is in a room with their laptops, and they're giving presentations and then doing feedback. They're all looking at the same screen. But after you do your presentation of your work, you have to spend a minute in your own words articulating your critic's point of view. Mm-hmm. In your own words. You have to. So, and as they say here, first we asked each invitee to take what we call the Powell Blood Oath. Each was welcome to argue passionately, but must also present and acknowledge weaknesses in their positions. And then they go for walks. They're in the Rockies, right? And they found that when they were hiking, they couldn't argue. So they physically broke down their capacity to just be in each other's. And I think there's huge potential. Obviously, huge impediments are cost and maybe not so much time if it's a fun thing for people to do. Mm-hmm. But could the social sciences benefit from a sort of a Powell Center somewhere on a beach or the like? Are there impediments to doing it just on our screens like this, or do you?
I think the problem is it just takes so much time. I mean, we do something like that in another adversarial collaboration that Gord and I are doing with John Haidt and Pete Ditto and Dave Rand and Phil Tallock on motivated reasoning. We had to do a lot of that when we meet over Zoom, which is like, let me say what I think you're saying. Because we had a really hard time like drilling down on what the actual disagreement was. And that does happen sometimes because both sides kind of come to like misunderstand their opponent to be sort of like maximally opposed to their own position, when in reality, both sides are usually a little closer. So we do something similar to the perspective taking kind of thing, but I think it would be hard to do adversarial collaboration all in person. One, it would be expensive and it would take a lot of time. Yeah. But like with a social science project, often there are multiple studies that take place over, you run a study, you get the results, and then that said, oh, well, now we've discovered this flaw in this study. Let's try this next one. So it'd be hard to condense all of that into like a few days or a week.
Sure.
But I think it would be possible to do. There'd be cases in which at critical times it would have been useful to come together. Like if you could imagine the case, we talked about before, the accuracy prompt thing, where the collaboration was actually adversarial. If at the point in which things were becoming more adversarial, we actually went and all came together and discussed it, it would have become less adversarial. Like people would not have been as keyboard warrior-y, you know what I mean? And we probably could have made more progress in a short period of time. Of course, to get everybody from all these different places in different countries to one place is not a small ask, though.
Yeah, sometimes it's even impossible to find a time to Zoom if you have too many people from too many time zones.
So I'm going to ask a question I hadn't thought about until just now. Can AI play a role in being the mediator?
So Barb Mellers at Penn has been working on adversarial collaborations with AI. I'm not sure if she's having it be the mediator. She is having it be kind of its own adversary, like having it represent, like uploading papers, competing papers, and having it articulate what the actual disagreement is, and then propose ideas for testing those different perspectives. And I haven't heard from her in a minute, but I think it's doing a very good job. And so you actually potentially could take the scientists out of the equation altogether. If I've written enough on my perspective and Gord's written enough on his perspective, you can just load it all up there, and it might do a better job of actually identifying where we disagree. And then maybe it would do a better job updating its belief if it ran a new study, collected new data, it might be able to articulate it in a more objective way than Gordon and I would end up articulating it, where he's like, well, we got to make sure to say X. And I'm like, well, we got to make sure to say Y. But that I'm not 100% sure about. But I do think actually there is hope that AI might be able to kind of run its own internal adversarial collaborations and potentially do a better job than scientists, which would be bad news for us.
Or at least like a first stab at it, because a lot of people are doing this obviously on Twitter now with Grok. I think I've done it. I posted on one where you say, how reasonable is this argument, or what's the counter argument? And it gives you a very quick kind of sketch that you can then test for its own biases. But it does feel like it can be, because it's ingesting so much stuff, can be revelatory to a certain extent. Gordon, am I being, silly?
No, I think so. I mean, you still face the barrier of, if you want something to become a consensus in science, you still need to get scientists to agree to it. And so, like, you can make the argument that the AI is doing a job, but you still have to that might be more compelling than saying to someone who disagrees with me that I'm doing a good job, and so it might get a little bit better. But it would be better if we were working together, and then the person can say, I know it's a good job because I contributed to it. But I think that's an interesting potential path for investigation for sure.
Corey, are there any other examples that are here, or are there other ones that are not yet here that you want to highlight?
I mean, that implicit racial bias one just got an R&R. I haven't asked those people whether they'd be okay with me spilling the beans, though, so I think I won't.
Okay.
I mean, Gordon and I have another one.
What's an R&R?
Oh, sorry. Revise and resubmit.
Okay.
Meaning it's moderately okay evaluation at the time.
Meaning that it has a good chance, but not a certain chance of getting published.
Yeah. No, Gordon and I have another one on AI.
Yeah, it's probably not even on the website.
It might not be on the website yet.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
That one is like, actually relating to what we were talking about just now, is like, we have these experiments where we're using AI to provide basically strong evidence in the form of a dialogue to people who believe conspiracies, for example. And so because the experiment is, we have AI kind of integrated into the survey software, people can write about a conspiracy that they believe in using their own words, provide their own idiosyncratic reasons for why they believe in that. And then the AI can very specifically and like thoroughly debunk the things that they say that are true and why they say they're true. And then what you find is that people really actually update their beliefs a lot more than you'd expect in these sorts of experiments. Yeah, there it is. You're quick with it.
Follow up with that one, yeah.
And then the question then is, now one of the kind of themes of the adversarial collaborations that I've had that involve Corey and people like Pete Ditto, who's great, are that my particular camp in the field say political motivations are overrated, that evidence matters more than people kind of think it does, that people's political identities don't disrupt their reasoning as much as researchers think they do. Whereas there's a lot of people in social psychology and elsewhere that think, well, identity is actually still really important, even if they might grant that evidence matters sometimes to some people, but political motivations are still really kind of run the day to some extent. And so we ran an experiment that we basically replicated this thing, but then we told people before they went into this conversation with the AI that it's basically trained on Republican sources. It's a Republican bot, or it's trained on a Democrat sources, and it's a Democrat bot. And then people are Democrats or Republicans in the study. And so they're going to talk to a bot that's basically like has a view that's inconsistent with their political identity. And what everybody would predict, and I presented this, and I swear to God, Corey, I'm sure everybody in the room thought there was going to be at least a weaker effect.
You gave a talk on this, and you had people raise their hand.
Yes, or I just looked at their faces. I mean, whatever. I can't remember if I got them to raise their hands. I'm just so certain that everyone thinks this is the case.
Yeah.
And so you can check your own intuitions on this. If you know that you're talking to a bot that's got an inconsistent political stance, are you going to listen to it as much? And most people would say no, obviously not. But we found no difference between conditions. And the difference here that's important is that it's really good at providing evidence. So like once you okay, like, okay, this is a Republican bot and I'm a Democrat, so that makes you like trust it less. But then once it gives you all the arguments, you're like, well, all right, I guess I'm wrong. And then people update just to the same extent. And so that was another case where I was right in my predictions.
Yeah, I was very wrong.
Some people
I definitely thought, like, you tell people this AI is trained by Republican or Democrat, it kind of gives you an out to not have to listen to them, even when they're providing convincing information. You can disregard it and be like, well, it's biased, I don't need to pay attention. But alas,
I mean, alas, it's a good thing.
Yeah.
I got the people, Corey,
People
that said
are updating their beliefs.
people have said that they thought it would go the other direction, like that people are going to believe the
Oh,
conspiracy.
that would, yeah.
And that is like, you know, so people's intuitions on this were way off. So anyways,
So
so we're doing more experiments like that. But this is that was as fun as any
like really
experiment.
like practically heartening potentially, because like we might have been struggling for millennia to agree on political things, and then maybe AI could actually get us on the same page, like, and save us from ourselves.
If we can get people to engage with it.
Oh boy,
The
that's
question
all.
is like, why is it just because the evidence is so good? Do people trust AI more than they trust humans because AIs don't have motivations at all? And that's kind of what we're sort of ruling out, that even if we think they have a motivation, they're still pretty persuasive, which suggests that the evidence is really powerful.
Yeah. And we've done experiments where we told people that they're talking to a human, and that also doesn't produce a difference. Like people, it's not like just that people trust the AI. It really is about
it's the evidence. Yeah,
it's the evidence.
And now we're running another study, and what are we doing? We're
this is actually currently running at this very moment.
Nice.
But we're doing the same sort of thing, but the topic is explicitly political. And it's talking about, you know, showing conflict between people's stated views and what, like, ongoing political events. And so in this case, because of conspiracies, the bot isn't political. Like, it's just, it doesn't even know that it's in an experiment. Like, you know what I mean? And so it's not like it's acting like a Democrat or Republican. It's just providing information. So now in this case, it'll be like more plausible that it is actually a Democrat Republican bot. And so we'll see if that actually, we're really ramping up the manipulation to make it, if it doesn't produce an effect that people still update to the same extent, then I'm really going to be right. And this is as exciting as science gets. Like that's
Boy, and not just as exciting, but it's also consequential. This is really important.
Exactly.
Although in this arena, you know, again, well, it's like, I've been wondering, is anyone studying community notes yet on Twitter or X, whether it's modulating people's adversarial tendencies or not? That feels like an interesting. I've been doing community notes for a while. Who the hell knows whether it helps? And it takes forever. Of course, you're always chasing the falsehood anyway, because Elon Musk will say something patently false and get 10, 20 million, 100 million views, and efforts to inject the reality kind of are always way late.
We have some research on community notes. Like this is actually a related case. It's not quite what you're saying, but we have a paper about how political motivations actually facilitate the success of community notes, because so partisans only fact check stuff they disagree with, right? So political motivations lead people to kind of selectively fact check, but that works in both directions. Like both partisans are fact checking each other, but they also only fact check things in general that should be fact checked. You know what I mean? Like it is still about the truth. It's like they're basically correcting each other's mistakes. And like the hardest problem with things like community notes is getting people to put the effort into getting the truth out there. And so if you can harness political motivations to motivate people to get it right, then you have the best of both cases. And so it's a case where political motivations actually facilitate the truth online, which is not the way that people usually think about that.
So I just want to be sure I got that. So in other words, sharing what you learned with your cohort.
Well, I mean, it's in this case, it's correcting the opposite side. There's someone says a falsehood, Elon Musk says something that's wrong, and then someone who's like doesn't agree with Elon Musk says, wait, that's wrong. They put work into doing the research to say this is actually wrong, and then because it was good work, it gets put on as an actual community note that people agree with, and then the other side does the same thing to the other side, and what you end up with is politically motivated truths. And so we need to harness those sorts of things if we actually want to make the internet more truth-based.
It's kind of the same like logic underlying the adversarial collaboration is like people are sufficiently motivated to find the flaws in the things they don't like. And so I will notice the flaws in methods that I think aren't going to support my preferred results. And then the same thing with community notes. If I hate Elon Musk, I'm willing to work a lot harder to show the ways he's wrong. And so you can use that sort of adversarial, like the skepticism to actually improve people's beliefs to be more aligned with empirical reality.
One thing that feels hard to me, I convey this a lot, and when I talk about social media, is the importance of pausing and reflecting before you share information that suits your priors. You know,
I still have that where when you click retweet and it's like, do you want to
if you haven't read the article? Yeah.
Oh, actually, I don't know. Oh, yeah, it still has have you read the article? I think.
I stopped using Twitter, so I don't actually know.
Yeah, I don't really retweet.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Blue Sky has got its own issues. But I think we don't examine our own priors enough, and then that could actually bolster our what's the word, reputation outside our own sphere, potentially. When I say our, I mean a social media user. Yeah. I've written actively about things I got wrong. Where, just a quick example, when Hurricane Harvey hit Houston, there was this photo floating around of Delta airliners like flooded, on a flooded tarmac, and it was a climate related, thing, and I retweeted it, and then a skeptic, sort of a constructive climate skeptic, Steve McIntyre, replied, said that's fake, and I went, oh, and I looked, and it was, and I ended up writing a piece about it, because to me, conveying my own, here I am, 40 years as a journalist and online communicator, and I still get fooled all the time too by my own beliefs. So I don't know whether somehow that feels like it's an important part of this, as well as sort of putting in the time on the no-brainers on the other side.
I mean, that's the sort of thing that we want to encourage. I mean, so the problem with the way our minds are structured is that we automatically try to confirm hypotheses instead of disconfirm them. Like that's it, and that is like it's not motivated in the same way that we often think about motivations. It's just the kind of automatic, natural way in which you think about hypotheses. It could be a hypothesis that you don't care about and completely is unimportant to you, but you still try to confirm it. And so but science is, you get the most information from the stuff that actually tests whether you're right or wrong. It's about disconfirmation. And so this is why adversarial collaborations are great, because it sharpens the knife that you're using to understand your own knowledge, understand what's actually happening in the world. You learn the most from the people who you disagree with. And so we need to, work actively. And it should, like, I always was confused by this thing where, like, when, for example, a scientist in psychology might discover that someone's going to replicate their research, and then the response to that often is like trepidation, like, oh my God, what if I'm wrong? Or like, what if and then it should be like excitement, like the person's putting work into testing something that you obviously thought was interesting enough to do work on, and if you're wrong, then that means you've learned something. So like now you knew something new, and they're going to give you knowledge for free. I mean, that's like the best thing. So
I think the problem there, though, is sort of the attitude in science and society more generally, where like there's not an appreciation for scholars who are wrong. There's not an appreciation for those like incremental steps where like maybe you were sort of onto something, but you were like 90% wrong, and then someone else builds on that, and now you're only 80% wrong, and then 50%, and then, but like, in psychology, I think if you're a person who ran a study and it failed to replicate, it's rarely like a source of pride, I think. Sure. And the reaction isn't good for you. It's, what did you do? Did you p-hack?
Yeah. Well, I mean, if it was the case that you admit, like Andy did, that you were wrong, then I would take it as a source of pride. When I see a scientist saying, I was wrong about this and I updated, then I think that's someone I respect, and I
feel like there are mixed reactions to this, because some people have come forward and been like, I no longer have confidence in this idea, And I think some people respect those people more and other people probably less. I don't know. On whole.
We should do research on that. I think
Yeah,
that people unilaterally respect them more. That's a study that we can run.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah. Well, this has been great. We have a few more minutes. There's so many threads here to pick up on. One would be, going how much of this, as you were implying there, relates to the wider structure of society where winners and losers are winners are rewarded and losers are disparaged. And, even how we grade in elementary school onward. There's so many. Can this process that you're working on be applied more widely, either in education down the chain, or what are some possibilities here going forward that to build, not just to convey the model works as you've done, but where could it be applied more? Maybe some quick.
I mean, I would like adversarial collaboration to be taught. I mean, you're talking about really young. Maybe you're talking about K-12 or something. But even
maybe to sharpen the question, kind of just sharpen it.
Yeah.
The other thing that kids learn is debate. Charlie Kirk was a great debater. Whatever you think about, but debate is a sport. I was just reading a piece about this. It's a win-lose sport. Mehdi Hassan on the liberal side is incredibly good at punishing his conservative debater partners. So we have a debate bias. We have a win-lose bias. How can this approach be propagated?
I think we want our politicians and our scientists to be different. Like, politicians are supposed to advocate for particular policies and their group's interests, whereas scientists, we at least want to say what we're pursuing is truth. And if I'm wrong, then I want to be wrong. Like, I want to know I'm wrong. That's not to say I do want to know I'm wrong, but that's what we would say as scientists, is that we're pursuing truth. And so, when it comes to like political debate, I think the objective there actually is to win, and it's really not necessarily to pursue truth, which then you'd want different rules, which is why I think in science, we don't want that kind of win-lose, humiliate each other, embarrass each other by showing how wrong. Like, it should be more of a collaborative thing where we're trying to make each other the best scientists we possibly can. But that's just not currently the culture, which is what we're trying to change. But slowly.
Yeah, I mean, I think the problem is that people view their research as a representation of their worth as scientists, which is really not the way we should think about it. Your worth as a scientist is just whether you are careful and you try hard and you care about the truth. And then, the winners and losers are. As a Canadian living in America, I think that it's true elsewhere, but America is very strong on the winner-loser ethos. And everything is a competition, and you have to be the best, and it matters it's really important what university you're at and all that kind of stuff. I mean, I think we could find ways to be a little bit more objective and care more about the truth. And
I don't know if it's a coincidence, but a lot of people who participated in adversarial collaborations are Canadian. I wonder if that's part of the reason why.
What a coincidence. I don't know what that's about.
Yeah, it's a little different culture.
Well, yes. I think your process, I think what you're doing is very creditable. I'd love to get you together with Jill Barron, who runs the John Wesley Powell Center project, the one for the physical sciences. There's probably lots of crosstalk that could be beneficial in both arenas. And it's just been great to host this, what I think is an initial conversation on a really important idea. Adversarial collaboration is a kind of a fundamental way to peel away some of our biases, those of others, and to get more clear about the methods and biases we have when we look at information around us. I say there's more to do here. I'm happy to have you on again sometime when there's a new finding. And this has been a great hour. This is Andy Revkin. This is Sustain What, which is all about using constructive questions to cut through the consequential complexity that's all around us. Thanks to Gordon Pennycook and to Corey Clark for coming on, and hope you can come on another time.
Thanks, Andy.
Thanks for having us.
Take care. And this gets archived wherever you're watching. So anyone who's watching can share it right away with the link you're watching on. Thanks again.
Cheers.
Hold on.